We'll spell the drugs. Come on,
Okay.
guys.
So, I'm sure all of you are well aware at this point that I'm making a TTRPG. Right. Not too long ago, I held a playtest with my main D&D group, and for once, I was actually able to complete a 13-session long playtest campaign where, let's just say that I found out that my game needs a little more work. The main issues were the decay and repair system that my players politely hated, everything to do with how Technician worked, and the fact that players who min-maxed their character in certain ways could have an army of drones following them around at all times, along with the fact that there's simply just too much shit in the game to keep track of at any one time. So I've been spending the last couple months working to address many of these main issues the game needs to improve to be competitive in this bustling TTRPG market we have right now. First of all, some stat changes. After reading Daggerheart and years of being annoyed with D&D system, I decided to simplify how ability scores work. Instead of having 27 ability score points to spend where you want, and each ability score costing a different amount of those points, or just assign the standard array, stats now start at 0 and you have 6 points to allot where you want. They're still the same amount of abilities, but the number you allot in them has been simplified. You no longer need to assign numbers to ability scores and then convert your ability scores into ability modifiers, and then proceed to almost never reference your ability scores again for the rest of the campaign. It's pretty much the exact same system, but the numbers have just been made smaller. This definitely affects many things throughout the game, but I want to spend more time talking about other things in this video, so I'll leave it there. Also, ability scores in Mythic are called stats, because I just really like Fallout. Onto skill changes. I got rid of some skills like Animal Husbandry and Psionics because they were skills that had way too specific use cases. Psionics as a skill is really only helpful when you're playing as a Scion. The same is true for Animal Husbandry. It's really only useful to level up if your character has an animal companion. But I didn't get rid of these skills completely, they just exist in the form of being folded into other existing skills. Animal Husbandry, for instance, is just part of the survival skill now. That way, if players want to make a Lone Ranger with an animal companion type build, they can do it relatively easily by just putting all their skill points into a single skill. Mythic also has a skill point system. On odd number level ups, players get 6 skill points to add to their existing skills. When a skill gets to a certain number of skill points, it will go up in tier and give a larger modifier to that skill. But what I found was that by the end of the game, players would only get enough skill points to get about 2 skills to max tier if they put no other skill points in any other skill. That was really fucking stupid, so I increased the amount of skill points gained per odd number level up to 12, doubling the amount and theoretically allowing players to get 2 skills to Mythic, 4 to Professional, and a few more skill points left over to get a couple other skills leveled up. Moving on to species changes. I don't want to go over all the changes I made to the species, but I do want to touch on how synthetics work. In Mythic, synthetics are robots or other types of machines that gain unshackled AI. This allows them to have intelligence on par with any living being. There are notable mechanical differences between synthetics and other living species, like how they need to use repair kits instead of stim packs to heal outside of rests, and cannot benefit from augmentations, medications, and suffer from poison or stress. Originally, synthetics couldn't use armor modifications and had to use upgrades from the automatons and drones modifications and attachments section. The problem being that those upgrades really weren't balanced for players to use. For instance, there were several upgrades that bestowed a +2 or more to base stats based on what tier you bought. So a tier 1 strength upgrade would permanently increase a synthetic's strength by 2, and a tier 3 strength upgrade would permanently increase a synthetic's strength by 6, each tier bonus increasing by 2. It was really cheap too, like 500 credits for just a +2 to base stats. If you're a DM watching this, you're likely as stunned as I was when my players suddenly messaged me about buying multiple synthetic upgrades, since players are supposed to get about 2k credits by the time they get to level 2, meaning this player could buy several +2 upgrades to base stats or 2 +4 upgrades to base stats. I know I was screaming internally when I heard this because in D&D 5e, the game Mythic is based upon, giving players a +2 item is considered game-changingly powerful, whereas giving a player a +3 item is considered borderline game-breaking. There were a bunch of items in the game like this that only synthetic players could get access to, since the living being counterpart of these upgrades are augmentations and are super expensive, making the synthetic species super OP from even low levels, since their versions of augmentations are super cheap. So you might be wondering why I made automaton and drones modifications and attachments so powerful and so cheap. So here's the stat block for the basic battle unit. As you can see, it's shit. And it's supposed to be shit. It's the most basic robot players can buy, and it's cheap enough to buy at the start of the game. The idea was that players could buy a robot, then buy upgrades for that robot over the course of the campaign to slowly bring up its stats to be competitive with PCs, while also keeping those upgrades affordable enough so players would have the money to both upgrade themselves and their robot companion. I'll get to it more later on why this didn't work out, but it didn't work out, and I ended up getting rid of this system entirely, which forced me to get rid of the restriction that synthetics couldn't use armor modifications and attachments, since they no longer relied on automatons and drones modifications and attachments to upgrade themselves. Long story short, during the playtest, as a band-aid solution, I made automaton and drones modifications and attachments a lot more expensive and gave smaller buffs. Species in Mythic also get upgrades as they level up. Synthetics specifically got an improvement at level 4 that allowed them to get a +1 level in STM to 2 separate skills, which essentially just gives them a +1 to a modifier of a skill. This species improvement was used further to min-max an R&D build to ridiculous heights at very low levels, so I changed it instead to give synthetics +2 charge slots at level 4, since charge slots are most commonly used for armor attachments, abilities, and are generally robot related. Getting into some combat changes, starting with ambush. Back when I was first writing this game, I decided I wanted to get fancy and make ambush a lot more complicated, where in D&D, when you successfully ambush enemies, your party just gets a free round where enemies can't do anything for that round. Very powerful, very easy to DM. I want to make a more interesting version of ambush, where when it's successful, players roll initiative like normal, but for the first round of combat, all PCs or NPCs that are surprised suffer penalties including only having 2 actions, suffering half speed, and suffering a tier of snag to all rolls, including their initiative rolls. So it was supposed to be a debuff that for the most part only affected round 1, but that tier of snag to rolling initiative would have made sure that ambush felt impactful for the entire combat encounter. Little did I know that this is really hard to effectively apply in combat encounters. I had one situation where players did not successfully gain an ambush round, but the synthetic player's robot companion did. So what am I supposed to do in that situation? Technically, enemies are surprised by that one robot companion, but not by anyone else. So should enemies get a debuff from a single ally NPC surprising them? And what if the same happened to players at some point? Should players get a debuff in round 1 of combat because one enemy NPC got an ambush on the players? No, that's fucking stupid. So I changed ambush back to how it works in D&D, since that can be more easily applied to 1 or 2 PCs or NPCs that successfully get ambushed, which is also much easier to DM for because I don't have to remember what enemies need to roll with snag on their initiative rolls. Several actions got minor alterations, not a lot worth talking about, but the action careful aim was removed from the game. It was a very popular action to take during the playtest. Players would often make their first attack, not move, then use their second and third actions to careful aim and fire a second time, basically without recoil, since the tier of edge they gained from the careful aim action potentially was enough to counter the -5 recoil modifier of the second attack in a single turn. I don't like this because I would much rather have players use their third action to make more interesting choices, or just move, or use an ability or item, rather than just stand in one place and shoot every turn. Not to mention that going prone in this game already gives players a tier of edge to all ranged firearm accuracy rolls, so players potentially could easily break the game by just going prone, using the careful aim action to get 2 tiers of edge for their first or second attack action, and with certain abilities like the sniper perk, could even get 3 tiers of edge for accuracy rolls very easily. I want players to find a bunch of ways to stack edge, but I don't want it to be that easy. At least with prone, there are advantages and disadvantages to doing it, where taking an action to careful aim is boring and has almost no downsides. Let's see, perk actions needed some fucking work. Going through all of it will bloat the fuck out of this video, but essentially technician abilities were really OP because abilities they have that functionally do the same things as some Scion abilities can do, like mind control abilities, technician abilities were just better versions of it. For instance, technicians have the Technician Tier 2 ability Hack HUD Mass, which allows them to potentially make several enemies attack each other. Scions have a similar Scion Tier 2 ability called Assume Control, but it's only a single target, making the Technician version objectively better. I fixed that and made ability scaling more comparable between the two. Woe is me, for my mind is smooth. And I'm far from done from revising perk actions. Some perk paths just need a straight up complete overhaul, unfortunately. Let's see, massive damage and lingering wounds have been removed from the game because I and players, but mostly me, could never remember that it was a thing that needed to happen in game. Massive damage occurs in the game when a player suffers enough damage in a single round to equal half their health. The same goes for lingering wounds, but only if you lose all that HP and fall unconscious at 0 HP. Lingering wounds, I think, sounds cool in concept, but I think would be really annoying in practice. I think it betrays the power fantasy of the game, not to mention that it's really only a present feature at low levels, when it's common for players to take enough damage to equal half their health, because their total health pool is just a lot smaller. It also required me to include things like robotic limbs of varying quality in the game, so that players could replace the limbs they lost, but they got really overcomplicated in their application, so I just removed it all to keep the game simple. Okay, here's one of the big ones, Decay and repair changes. So I originally got the idea for my Decay and repair system from XP to level 3's Fallout TTRPG. I really liked it in concept, and I really wanted to include it so Mythic could be used for a Fallout-like setting, or for a setting where players are soldiers out in the field for a really long time and their gear starts to degrade, creating interesting situations where their own gear becomes unreliable and they have to loot enemy gear for replacements or something. I modified it to fit into Mythic better, but in practice, my players really didn't like this system. Essentially, when players rolled a 1 on their accuracy rolls, their weapons would suffer a level of decay, LOD, which would apply a -1 to accuracy rolls for that weapon until it was repaired. When dropping to 0 hit points, players' armor suffered a level of decay, which would reduce the armor's AR by 1. The debuffs would compound, so if a weapon has 5 levels of decay, then it has a -5 modifier to accuracy rolls, where if armor has 5 levels of decay, it has a -5 modifier to AR, which AR is the same thing as AC, essentially. LOD 6 was considered broken and unusable, but still repairable. Players could repair their weapons and armor during brief and extended rests. For brief rests, they could attempt to repair each item once. For extended rests, they could attempt to repair each item twice, and they could make infinite repair attempts on items during downtime. Repairing equipment was done by making R&D rolls, where you rolled a repair check with engineer tools. The DR you needed to meet or beat was determined by the level of decay an item had. The DR was the level of decay, doubled, and then added 10 to it. This was referred to as the repair DR. When repairing the item, you reduce its level of decay by 1 level. If you roll a natural 20 on the repair check, you reduce the level of decay of an item you are repairing by 2 levels. In fact, I think I later changed it so that if you rolled a nat 20, you just keep making repair checks until it has either no more levels of decay to repair, or you fail once, but I don't remember at this point. It was also featured in the game that weapons and armor with levels of decay could be sold from vendors' randomly generated inventories. The idea being that players could buy shitty guns and armor with levels of decay and fix them up during downtime for cheaper purchases. Things with level of decay would have 10% of their total value reduced per level of decay. Except that immediately created an issue in that players could buy very powerful guns with LOD 6, which means it's broken and unusable, and repair it to 0 levels of decay in a single downtime, since originally there was no cost or consequence to repairing things during downtime. This was a problem because in RPGs, really good weapons and armor are very expensive for a reason. They're not balanced for low-level characters. If you manage to get an anti-materia rifle in Fallout New Vegas at a low level, you're not going to be very accurate with it, but when you do hit, it's going to hit like a fucking truck. So I tried a band-aid fix. During the playtest, I made it so making repair attempts on equipment cost 10% of the item's total cost. That way players couldn't infinitely make repair attempts on items and potentially get really powerful weapons at low levels. My players really didn't like this, to say the least. 10% of the item's total cost could get really pricey per attempt pretty fast, and players really didn't like that they both needed to spend money to make repair checks and potentially lose money without gaining anything if they fail their repair checks. After the pushback, I dropped it to 5% of the item's total value, but it was clearly a bigger issue. The next issue with the system was that it revolved almost entirely around making R&D checks. Players didn't like being incentivized to have a character in the party that was good at R&D to make all the repairs for everyone's equipment, or being forced to make their character good at R&D at least a little, just to make sure their weapons and armor stayed in good working order. My players recommended that, at least for weapons, they could use their weapon skill to repair their weapons, so it's not just one character doing all the repairs, or forcing everyone to invest at least a little bit in R&D. I wasn't super into this change at first. I really didn't see an issue with every party needing an R&D focused character to fill the role of the group's repairman in a role-playing game, but I kinda understand where they're coming from. It does suck not being able to simply have your character be able to take care of themselves and their own equipment. So I made a change to the system that for weapons, players could use either an R&D check or a weapon skill check to repair their weapons. Except the problem with this is that you don't add your base stats to weapon skills. That's the big difference between normal skills and weapon skills in this game. You know, when you add a base stat to an accuracy roll or a damage roll, it's customized by the weapon, not the weapon's skill. You know, for instance, an accuracy roll for a pistol is 1d20 plus dex plus ballistic weapons STM. You're not adding dex to the roll because you're always adding dex to ballistic weapons STMs. You're adding it because that is what the weapon itself calls for. So if players are making repair checks with weapon STMs, they're objectively at a disadvantage for repairing their stuff than just having the person with the best R&D in the group do it all, since R&D STMs have the base stat plus the skill training level added together for every roll. So I was literally making the game more complicated to have what was originally true still be true from a min-maxing point of view, that just having a PC that was good at R&D do all the repairs was still the most optimal option. I was just appeasing my players at that point and bloating an already bloated system. In the end, I just got rid of the system. It's crap and overly complicated for all the reasons brought up. I think players will enjoy the game more without needing to keep track of the -1, 2, or 3 modifiers based on the LODs of an item. I think it will definitely help preserve the power fantasy of the game and should generally make the game more enjoyable to play, even if it has less depth to its survival mechanics now. I gutted those too, but I'm not even going to talk about it in this video. Okay, another big one, misfires, reloading, and magazine sizes. To be succinct, players really didn't like gun jamming. In Mythic, if you roll a 3 or lower for your accuracy roll, without adding anything to that roll yet, your weapon jams and you have to make a repair check to unjam the weapon. The repair check had all the same issues as I mentioned before with repairing equipment, other than unjamming doesn't require you to spend money. The DR to unjam your weapon was different based on what you rolled. 3 was DR9, 2 was DR12, and a nat 1 was a DR15 and caused a level of decay. One of the first issues of this was that players and I could never remember what we rolled for weapon jams. We would all just write down that the weapon is jammed and not what they actually rolled. So making the unjam be a variable DR just never worked, so I changed it to be a set DR15 to simplify the game. Players really didn't like the idea that at any moment, your main gun could just suddenly become unusable for possibly the rest of the combat. If players' R&D or weapon skill was too low, they just wouldn't be able to repair their shit or be forced to use their sidearm or melee weapons, or use their abilities more, or use their items instead of just shooting their favorite gun. And therein lies why I included a rule like misfire and jamming in the game. Because, like I said before with careful aim and why I took it out of the game, despite Mythic being a gun-focused game where you spend most of your turns shooting, having a feature in the game that regularly forces players to do something other than just shoot their favorite gun over and over again was important to me. I don't know about everybody else, but it really bothers me when I play D&D that you almost never change the equipment you use throughout the entire campaign. If some enemies in D&D didn't have a resistance to non-magical weapons, I guarantee some players would just never use magical weapons, or DMs would just never include them in their campaign because they can sometimes be overpowered. People only switch to using better gear when it offers bonuses objectively better than what they are already using, and outside of magical weapons, that's rare in D&D. Get a flame tongue weapon in D&D, I guarantee you might never find anything better in the entire campaign. And there is no feature in D&D, other than annoying ones like being forced to drop your weapon, that forces players to at least sometimes use different weapons or tactics than just using their primary weapon. The only time fighters don't run up to enemies to hit them with their +2 pool noodle is if the enemy is just out of range and they are forced to use a bow or crossbow for once. And that's the point of the misfire mechanic, to force players to at least sometimes change up their tactics. I don't want players' weapons to constantly jam and still be mostly usable, but I think it would be fun if the sniper character, for instance, is forced to use like a melee weapon for once in their lives because both their weapons are jammed. And above all that, I think weapon jamming's biggest issue was that it's a negative consequence of something players have no control over, so I decided to get rid of it. But I still really wanted to somehow force players to at least sometimes do something other than shooting their favorite gun, even if that's only switching to their second favorite gun, so I decided to focus more on the reloading mechanic. In Mythic, reloading costs 2 to 3 actions to perform depending on what weapons you're using when you have emptied your firearm's magazine, which you have to keep track of how many shots you fired in combat. So, reloading and unjamming your weapon is almost the same thing, other than reloading requires no skill check to perform, having a much lower bar of entry to perform in combat. So I decided to go all in on the reloading mechanic instead, since it's essentially doing the same thing as the misfire mechanic, but instead of coming about from a negative consequence players have no control over, it comes directly from player choice. Players choose to shoot their guns, and as a consequence, they have to reload them sometimes, which should make the mechanic more tolerable to players. To further support this, I've also reduced the size of magazines across the board in the game. So where the rifle, for instance, before this revision had 20 bullets in its magazine, it now only has 4. That's a pretty huge decrease in magazine size. Why did I reduce it so much? Because if a weapon can be fired 4 times before needing to be reloaded, then a player can fire a rifle twice per turn, 2 turns in a row, before needing to reload on their 3rd turn. Combat encounters in Mythic are like in D&D, where they last on average between 3 to 5 rounds. And if players need to reload semi-consistently on the 3rd round of combat, then it's almost guaranteed that players will need to reload their weapons at least once per combat encounter. Of course, this is all under the assumption that players only shoot their guns twice per turn and have a weapon with a magazine size of 4. There are weapons in the game that have larger and smaller magazines, but the largest magazine currently in the game is 6. And who knows, some players might spend all 3 actions just shooting every turn, so they might reload more or less frequently. This will also make keeping track of how many bullets you have in your magazine easier because smaller numbers are easier to understand and remember. But it will also guarantee that players will need to frequently make an action economy decision mid-combat to either spend most of their turn reloading or switching to a different weapon or tactic, which is exactly what I want, and I think it will make the game far more enjoyable in future playtests. Automatons, auto turrets, and min-maxed R&D builds. So here's what was probably the biggest issue in the playtest. Originally, players could pair with a number of automatons equal to 1/4 their R&D STM, minimum 0. So if players maxed out their R&D STM, which I think is like 11 or 12, the max amount of robot companions they could have was 3. That doesn't sound like a lot, but when considering robot companions' skill modifiers are based on PC's R&D STMs, 3 shitty robots can actually become very powerful. This is AFP-01. This was the PC of the player who chose to play synthetic and chose to play as a technician, the hacker build essentially. So he was 100% all about technology. Before I get too far, and as a precaution in case he sees this video someday, I just want to say that this player did nothing wrong. In fact, he did exactly what I needed him to during this playtest. He made a build that pushed the system to its limits, and I scrambled to nerf it as the playtest went on, much to his dismay. He min-maxed his R&D skill, so by like level 3, he already had 2 robot companions. For accuracy, saves, and modifiers to physical stats like strength and dexterity, robot companions gained a bonus equal to half the R&D mod of the person they're paired to, in this case AFP, which was about +6 by the end of the playtest. Here are the stats of the basic battle unit. They're pretty shitty, right? Not when most skills and stats are gaining a +6 bonus. AFP had one basic battle unit and a single recon drone, and both were outputting some really fucking good damage, and hitting really often since they had such large modifiers. It helps that they were using laser weapons that don't have recoil in this game, but still. Even compared to PCs, these robot companions that are meant to fill support roles and not be on the same level as PCs without upgrades I previously mentioned were more accurate than some PCs. This was all made worse with auto turrets. Players could buy 3 different types of auto turrets that had different stats. Light was the weakest, but also the lightest, and heavy did the most damage, but was very, well, heavy. Mythic has a carry capacity system to prevent players from bringing as much stuff as possible with them at all times, since Mythic is much more focused on equipment to make the player more powerful, instead of the D&D's approach where most of the player's power is derived from their class features. So while auto turrets are little things you could bring along with you to give you some extra fire support in combat, the trade-off was that their weight would prevent you from bringing other stuff with you in your backpack. Even the mini turrets still weighed 15 pounds, and if you aren't playing a strength-focused build, that's going to fill up a decent lump in your bag. But to get to why auto turrets were bad is that there are no rules in the game to limit how many you could bring with you. I, in my infinite smooth-brained gamer wisdom, thought that just making turrets heavy was enough to prevent players from bringing along more than 1 or 2 at any one time. What I failed to consider is that characters with high R&D skill can have robot companions that have their own independent carrying capacities, along with other PCs who are strength focused, just having a shitload of carry capacity. So other PCs and NPCs could carry a bunch of turrets with them and have the one R&D mid-max player pair with all of them and give them all his +6 modifier to accuracy, making for a clusterfuck of robot companions and auto turrets, all with high accuracy just gunning down whatever enemies I throw at the players, even if their damage isn't all that good. And the biggest issue, bigger than everything else so far, was that robot companions and auto turrets got full turns in combat, with all 3 actions to spend on their turn each turn. As the DM, I didn't control a robot companion or auto turrets, AFP did. So essentially by the end of the playtest, AFP got 4 turns per round of combat. I shouldn't need to say it, but I'm going to say it. It's fucking insane, and I was stupid as fuck for thinking any of this was okay while I was making the game before the playtest. Giving a single player the ability to take so many turns per round is fucking migraine inducing. The fact that one player just got so much more action economy over every other build was crazy to allow. I mean, he had 2 robots that could do anything a normal PC could. At least with auto turrets, they can't move and don't have hands. All they can do is shoot, so it's not too bad, but the damage he was outputting per round of combat with all of his minions was completely busted. So what am I doing to address all these issues? First of all, like I mentioned before, I gutted the automatons and drones section. Players can no longer just go and buy robot companions and spend money to make them better. Instead, I reworked the entire section to be a perk path. Perk paths in Mythic kind of function more like traditional classes like you might see in D&D, where you increase their tier at certain levels and get new class features. Automatons and drones are now the robot companion perk path that restricts players to only having 1 robot companion at any time, and that robot companion can only be paired to 1 person who took that perk path. This way, at most, players can only double the size of the player party if every person takes the robot companion perk path. The first tier of the robot companion perk path isn't that great either. The tier 1 version is essentially like an iBot from Fallout, so they only get 1 weapon and don't have hands to manipulate objects with, along with only getting 2 turns on their turn. So, unless a player is investing in the robot companion perk path to get to at least tier 2, which takes 4 levels to get to by the way, they won't get that much use out of it. I also made it so robot companions' turns always come after the player who is paired to the robot companion, so the players only need to roll 1 initiative roll per each combat encounter. Just a little optimizing. Tier 2 robot companions is where the perk path really becomes useful. The robot companion gains a human-like torso and arms, but no legs, still floating. This way the robot companion can manipulate things with its hands, use weapons other than its integrated ones, and you can choose a focus for it. The focuses are Vanguard, who fills a more tank role, Utility, who buffs friendlies, debuffs enemies, and heals, and Assault, who is all about sneaking and doing a shitload of damage. Tier 3 is an improvement over Tier 2, but not a massive one. The Robot Companion stats get a bit better, and they can pick some extra abilities along with gaining legs. Robot Companions, no matter what tier or focus, all come with set stats now. Their stats are no longer based upon a player's R&D stat or buying upgrades, making the perk path worth taking for any kind of build now. But repairing the Robot Companion during rests is still dependent on yours or someone else's R&D skill. Well, if you don't have repair kits. So it's still a good idea to have someone with good R&D in your party. And unlike synthetics, the player species, Robot Companions do not get hit dice and must be repaired through R&D checks and repair kits to heal it all. As for auto turrets, it is now canon within the rules that players can only have one auto turret at a time, where before it took 3 actions to deploy a turret and it got a full turn in combat, making it a thing you're supposed to set up before a combat type thing. Now they can be put down or picked up as a single action and only get a single action on their turn in combat that comes right after the turn of who deployed it. There's just one type of turret now for simplicity that uses the mini turret stats, the idea being that buying upgrades will be the thing that differentiates one player's turret from another. Just like Robot Companions, turrets now have set stat blocks and are no longer reliant on the R&D skill, but also can only be healed via repairs from R&D skill check or repair kit, making it much more usable by all builds, but most optimally by R&D builds. The last thing I want to touch on is AR creep. AR in Mythic is the same as AC in D&D, which is armor class, the thing that prevents you from taking damage. Now, let's meet Korra Cod, Korra for short, or at least his character sheet. Pretty cool, right? Very neatly made, good handwriting, overall pretty good character. You know what isn't cool about Korra? His AR. Yeah, believe it because you're seeing it. At level 5, the highest level my playtesters got to in the playtest, which is only half the total levels in the game, he was able to get his AR up to fucking 25. 25. If there are any DMs listening to this, I know you're striking the pose like Edvard Munch's famous painting The Scream right now. Because even in D&D, an AC that fucking high is ridiculous. And I'm sure you're wondering the same thing I was when hearing about it. How the fuck did this player get his AR so high? Now, again, just like before, the player who made this character did nothing wrong. He did what I needed him to and pushed the game to its limits, which allows me to now patch the game to reduce the AR creep issues the game obviously has, improving the game overall. With that out of the way, let's break down his build. First off, Korra is a species called Chthon. Chthon's species bonuses are Strength +2, Resolve +2, Intelligence -2, Insight -1, and AR +1. Yeah, they get a bonus to AR at level 1. But it's only a +1, what's the big deal, right? Well, when Chthons reach level 4, they get another +1 to AR for a total of +2. But again, what's the big deal? It's a measly +2 to AR. Well, let's take a gander at his perks. He took the Toughness perk, which gives him another +2 to AR, along with the Akimbo perk that gives him another +1 to AR while dual wielding weapons. Okay, his bonus to AR without even looking at his armor yet is already +5. It's already getting pretty high just for a bonus. Now let's take a look-see at his gear. Looks like he's got a light shield, which gives his player another +1 to AR, with no downsides. That's super cool. Bringing his bonus to AR up to +6 without even considering his armor yet. Uh-oh. Now, let's finally look at his armor. I know his character sheet reads medium armor, but I confirmed with the player that he was using heavy armor by the end of the playtest. Which makes sense, he was a strength build and heavy armor in Mythic scales off his strength, unlike in D&D, where the heaviest armor in the game has a set AC. In Mythic, heavy armor AR is 14 plus player's strength modifier, resulting in Korra having an AR at the end of the playtest of 19, but when we add that +6 to it, and suddenly, we get the 25 number. It got even worse because in the final fight, AFP used a technician ability called Bestow Energized Armor, but used its tier 2 variant to give Korra another +3 to AR. So in the final fight, Korra had an AR of 28, and the big bad evil guy I made literally couldn't hit him without using attacks that required saves. It was all pretty fucking stupid. So what have I done to address all this to stop it from happening again? Well, in D&D, I personally think getting an AR of 22 or 23 should be the cap. Going beyond that makes for characters that are near impossible to hit. Unless you're playing Baldur's Gate 3 and have nearly 30 AC, that doesn't seem to matter at all. Yeah, I'm salty. So I scrubbed through Mythic and changed a bunch of stuff to get rid of AR increases where I thought I could. I don't want to put an actual cap in the game for how high you can get your AR to, because I think that's lame. But I do want to reduce all the options in the game as much as possible to make it difficult, if not impossible, to get beyond about 22 AR. The perk Elusive Stride was removed from the game since it made it so if you just made a move action on your turn, your AR would increase by 2 until the top of your next turn. Toughness, the perk Korra took, was also removed from the game since it just gave players a flat +2 to AR. The Technician ability Energized Armor duration was reduced to 1 minute to make sure it really only works for a single combat encounter, specify that it cannot be used on heavy armor users, and reduce the bonuses to AR it gives to start at +1 and increase by 1 when casting it at higher tier variants, upcasting essentially. Korra was also using an armor attachment called Power Exoskeleton that gave him a +2 bonus to strength, which is how he got his strength to +5 in the first place. And since heavy armor scales with strength, that means powered exoskeletons directly raise the AR of heavy armor. So all forms of powered exoskeletons got a nerf in how much strength they give a player to start at +1 and increase by +1 per tier. And while I was in the neighborhood nerfing stuff, I decided to remove the AR buff for Tesla repulsion armor. And the last AR nerf I made was actually an augment that players never even saw, because they never had the money for it. It's called subdermal armor, which is essentially semi-organic plates of armor installed under the skin to give players higher AR. It originally boosted AR by +3, but after all the rigmarole I went through with the last playtest, I'd rather be safe than sorry, and I reduced the bonus down to just +1 to AR. So it's a very expensive augment now for just a +1 bonus to AR, but I know min-maxers will pay whatever they need to get that small boost no matter what. I had to make changes to the Chthon species too, because the AR bonuses it got for just existing was a nuisance. So I made a simple change of making Chthon bonuses to AR be instead bonuses to fortitude saves. I'd much rather have a character harder to poison or trip than be nearly impossible to hit in general without forcing them to make saves. Lastly, let's talk about shields. This is the light shield. It's dirt cheap and gives a PC +1 to their AR without any drawbacks. That was fucking stupid design. And my players very quickly noticed how cheaply they get a +1 to AR with it. So this is how I changed it. First of all, Light Shield was removed from the game. I couldn't think of a reason why Light Shields should have a negative consequence to using them. The whole point of them, in contrast to other shields, is that their bonus to AR is smallest and didn't impede the PCs at all. But that's also its main problem. So I just couldn't justify keeping them in the game. At least medium and heavy shields take up a hand, so you can't effectively wield two-handed weapons and a shield at the same time without debuffs. Or unless you have multiple arms, or are really fucking strong. I also gave shields weapon descriptions and stats so they can be used as weapons. So if you want, you can wield multiple shields like in Dark Souls, or throw them at enemies like Captain America. Okay, so I'll leave it there for now. After the last 2 mega videos I made about Dark Souls and Daggerheart, I'm all tuckered out. The actual patch notes for the first big revision of Mythic are about 36 pages long, and that's not including the overhauls I'm making to spaceships and space combat that wasn't playtested. After getting the general vibes down on the last playtest, I knew what sections needed to be simplified and reworked even without having players testing them. But if you want to know how space combat is generally meant to work, think FTL, that space game that blew up like 13 years ago. God damn, I'm old. Anyways, I know there's a general lack of context in this video for the game I'm making, but hopefully this video functions as an entertaining introduction to the game while also getting more people interested in it. The biggest fear I have for Mythic isn't that it might be dog shit, although I'm scared of that too. The biggest thing I'm scared of is that it's just going to turn out like all the other stuff I've put out on the internet over the years, where I put weeks to months to years of effort into making it, and ends up getting no attention whatsoever, and making me feel like I just wasted years of my life. But anyways, enough trauma dumping. Thanks for stopping by and have a good one. Hopefully you'll come back whenever I make more Mythic content in the future.